Friedrich II, also known as Friedrich der Grosse, was King of Prussia from 1740 to 1786. From a young age, he learned French and was introduced to French art, preferring it to German, and avoided speaking German, which cost him the loss of his native language. He read Rousseau, Voltaire, Diderot, and was persuaded by the Enlightenment ideas. He gradually collected their works in his library and invited and hosted intellectuals he admired to stay with him at his court. In 1745, with Georg Wenceslaus von Knobelsdorff as architect, he began building his summer palace, the Sanssouci. Its name may indicate that the palace was built for the accommodation of pleasures, since Sanssouci means carefree, without worries. The entire palace is designed in the Rococo style, with fountains, shrubs pruned into conical shapes, and hundreds of statues around the building in the form of the god Atlas, appearing to support its roof. Inside, the Rococo style is present. Most of the paintings are by French Rococo painters such as Antoine Watteau and Jean-Baptiste Pater, painters whose main subject matter is aristocrats in their living rooms, where instead of living rooms and sofas, fantastic landscapes are depicted in the background. Everything has a curved and golden frame, from the furniture and mirrors to the paintings on the walls and ceiling. Friedrich had a concert hall in his courtyard. With a keen interest in music, collecting instruments, and playing the flute, Friedrich dedicates his afternoons to it, either alone or accompanied by the musicians he had hired and hosted. These include Karl Heinrich Graun for the opera, František Benda for the violin, Johann Joachim Quantz for the flute, and Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach for the keyboard. But how did their music sound like? Quantz wrote hundreds of flute compositions to play with Friedrich. There is an example in Quantz's Trio Sonata in C major for 2 flutes and harpsichord. It is heavily embellished in accordance to the Rococo style. Also, counterpoint seems to be less important. In fact, Friedrich prohibited the composition of strict counterpoint, since the new tendency of the Rococo and Galant style had put counterpoint aside. This painting itself raises a question about the Rococo painters who passed through Sanssouci, as it took 100 years for someone else, Adolf Mengel, to paint what was happening within the courtyard. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, son of Johann Sebastian, had been Friedrich's harpsichordist since 1740. Friedrich had heard rumors about Johann Sebastian and wanted to invite him to Potsdam. This would of course have happened after the war that was then taking place, the Second Silesian War, named Zweiter Schlesischer Krieg, since Johann Sebastian was staying in Leipzig while his son was being hosted by Friedrich and could not visit him. In fact, in December 1745, Leipzig was under Prussian occupation. Johann Sebastian's son had married and had 2 children whom he had not yet met. After the end of the war, in 1747, Bach went from Leipzig to Potsdam, about 150 kilometers away, accompanied by his other son, Wilhelm Friedemann. Arriving at Potsdam in May 1747, he had to present himself to Friedrich, and as soon as they met, Friedrich asked him to play on his collection of harpsichords and pianoforte. He then played him a melody on the flute and asked him to improvise on it, using it as a fugue theme. The next day, he asked him to play on the 4 organs he had in Potsdam. After all, Bach had arrived there known as an excellent organ player. 2 months later, after returning to Leipzig, Bach sends Friedrich a work and dedicates it to him as a musical offering, Musikalisches Opfer, based on the theme given to him. In the dedication, he references his latest visit to Potsdam and introduces him to the musical offering. He finishes adding, "Your most humble servant, the composer." The work consists of 2 Ricercari, which is another name for fugue, a sonata with 4 movements and 10 canons. On the first page is a sentence made up of the initials of the word Ricercar, which means, "By the king's command, the song and the remains were resolved by canonical art." Ricercar is another name for fugue, a genre based on 1 or more subjects and consisting of entrances and episodes heard by independent voices. The entrance is where the subject is heard, so the sections in which the theme is absent are the episodes. If there is a melody that frequently appears with the subject, then this melody is a counter-subject. The subject, in its body, has 9 consecutive notes that succeed each other in a descending semitone interval, which makes it unsuitable for basic material for counterpoint composition. At the same time, in the 2nd to 3rd measure, there is a leap of 7th, equally difficult to handle. There is a musicological debate as to whether the Thema Regium was written by Friedrich or Bach's son, and whether the difficulty was intentional to challenge or even embarrass Bach. The subject of the first Ricercar for 3 voices has 5 countersubjects, of equal length, meaning 5 melodies that accompany the subject more than once in the piece. There is a total of 9 entries of the subject. The subject of the Ricercar for 6 voices is the same, with the difference that the pair of eighths has become a 4th. The subject has a single counter-subject, and there are also 2 other subjects that appear later. The second and third subject appear in stretto, meaning the next statement of the subject begins before the previous one ends, creating an overlap. The Baroque sonata consists of movements, usually 4. The first movement is slow and acts as an introduction. Its fast movements have a dance form. The only sonata by Bach published before his death is that of the musical offering. It has 4 movements, slow, fast, all in C minor. It is written for flute, violin, and continuo. The first movement has a minuet form, and the second, a ternary A-B-A form. The third and fourth have a more free form based on motives. The slow movement at the beginning is contrary to what Friedrich was familiar with, since the musicians at his court wrote sonatas in the Rococo style, which began immediately with the fast movement. In the second movement, the A section can be recursively split. There are a total of 6 entries of the tema regium within the movement, 1 on the flute, 1 on the violin, and 4 on the continuo. It is always heard against the theme of the movement, and therefore functions as a counter-subject. The andante is based on 2 motives, which make up almost all of the notes in the movement. The fourth movement is a gigue, a dance form in 6/8. Another variation of the thema regium appears in it. A canon is a type of composition in which there is a basic melody that is heard by all voices. What differs per voice is the point at which they begin. For example, in a canon for two voices, the melody is heard first in one voice and then in the second, so there is a time difference between them, where their combination produces the result. In the canons of this work, not only the starting point changes, but also the way they are performed. The first canon is for two voices, which begin at the same time. The designation cancrisons means like a crab, which indicates that in one, the text should be heard from the beginning, and in the other from the end in the opposite direction. When they finish, each instrument should return to the point where it started. In the next canon, from the title it appears that it should be played by two violins, with unison imitation, that is, at the same pitch. A symbol indicates the point from which the imitation begins. The starting point was added later. Bach does not note it in the original, leaving only the bare minimum instructions. Simultaneously with the canon, a variation of the thema regium is heard in the lower voice. Next, in the upper voice, as written, the thema regium is heard as is. In the canon heard in the two lower voices, the second voice begins at the point marked in motum contrarium, which means opposite movement, performing the opposite of what is written. The designation augmentionem contrario motu indicates that, after the lower voice begins, at that point marked, the third voice appears in opposite motion and twice as slow. Bach adds the text in Latin. As the notes increase, may the fortune of the king grow. The per tonos designation states that each time the text is played, it should appear a tone higher. Thus, with each repetition, the tonal center rises one tone, forming an endlessly rising canon. Bach adds in Latin, "As the modulation ascends, so may the glory of the king ascend." The next canon is both a fugue for 3 voices and a canon at the same time. The third voice begins at measure 11, reading from the beginning of the upper staff in a fifth higher. Here, the beginning of this canon is logically connected to its end, so that it continues indefinitely, perpetuous. The second and last bars of the score are incomplete and function as complementary. The next canon has a 12-bar subject as its basic material, which is a variation of the tema regium. The violin begins 2 bars after the flute and plays the subject in inversion. This pattern can be repeated indefinitely. The instruction querendo invenietis is written in Canons 9 and 10, meaning, by seeking you will find. Only 1 voice is written, while the 9th canon is for 2 voices and the 10th for 4. Performers are invited to understand how and when they will play. There are more than one solution to these canons. The text from the portrait of Bach is read in a similar way, where the canon triplex for 6 voices is read from 2 sides to form a canon. The 10th canon is for 4 voices.